Girivardhari Jaya Girivardhari Jaya Girivardhari Yashodanandana Prajajana Ranjana Yashodanandana Prajajana Ranjana Yashodanandana Prajajana Ranjana Yashodanandana Prajajana Ranjana Yamuna Tira Vanachari Yamuna Tira Vanachari Yamuna Tira Vanachari Yamuna Tira Vanachari Jaya Raja 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 Jaya Radha Madhava Radha Madhava Jaya Raja Raja Shri Guru Gaurav ki, Shri Nrsimha Bhagwan ki, Shri Prabhupada ki, Kancha Shri Bhagavatam ki, Nitai Gaur Premanandi.
Hari Hari Bol.
Reading from Srila Prabhupada Lila Amrita, I have done my part. A few of Srila Prabhupada's disciples from the West also arrived just to be with him, hoping to render some menial service. When Prabhupada received them in his dark, cool quarters, he was sitting up on his bed. One of the arrivals, Madhudvisha, had left Krishna consciousness for more than a year, but now came before Prabhupada shaven-headed and wearing Vaishnav tilak. Don't leave us, said Prabhupada feelingly. You can stay as Grihastha, but don't leave us. To Satsvarup, Prabhupada said, I like your magazine, Back to Godhead, especially the article, Srila Prabhupada Speaks Out. Shrutakirti, who had come from Hawaii, showed Prabhupada some candles they were producing and selling, and Prabhupada laughed. You Westerners, he said, there is no scarcity of money, but now I have taught you how to spend it. For more than half an hour, Prabhupada went on talking pleasantly. Later, Tamal Krishna told the devotees that Prabhupada's outlook seemed to change, depending on the people around him and the news he received, and he told them of Prabhupada's plans to go to the West. That evening, when Srila Prabhupada called for Tamal and the others, the devotees gathered and went up to Prabhupada's balcony, not knowing what to expect. Srila Prabhupada was lying on his bed. Sit down, he said. I want simply to see you all. It gives me vital force. Mercifully and lovingly he looked upon his devotees as they sat around him. The air was filled with frankincense billowing from the pot of coals Upendra had prepared for keeping mosquitoes away. Evening arti began in the temple, and the sound of the kirtan rose to the little balcony. One by one, the men present began to massage Prabhupada. Shrutakirti and Satsarup were each massaging a leg, while Tamal Krishna massaged Prabhupada's head. Another devotee fanned. Prabhupada lay back with his eyes closed peacefully. "You are all Vaishnavas," he said. "Be merciful to me." Prabhupada ki.
Yeah.
A reading from Srimad Bhagavatam, Canto 5, Chapter 17, The Descent of the River Ganges. Text 12? Text 12. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya.
Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya.
Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. So I'll read through the Sanskrit to text 12. Eshu Purushanam Ayuta Purushayu Vashanam Teva Kalpanam Naga Yuta Prananam Vajra Sanghanana Balavayo Moda Pramudita Maha Sorata Mituna Vyavaya Pavarga Vashatritaika Garba Kalatranam Tatratu Trita Yuga Samakalo Vatate. Please repeat. Eshu. In these 8 varshas or tracts of land.
In these 8 verses or tracts of land.
Purushanam.
Purushanam.
Of all the men.
Of all the men.
Ayuta.
Ayuta.
10,000.
10,000.
Purusha.
Purusha.
By the measure of men.
By the measure of men.
Ayu Varshanam.
Ayu Varshanam.
Of those whose years of life.
Of those whose years of life.
Teva Kalpanam.
Deva Kalpanam.
Who are like the demigods.
Who are like the demigods.
Naga Ayuta Prananam.
Naga Ayuta Prananam.
Having the strength of 10,000 elephants.
Having the strength of 10,000 elephants.
Vajra Sanghanana.
Vajra Sanghanana.
By bodies as solid as thunderbolts.
By bodies as solid as thunderbolts.
Bala.
Bala.
By bodily strength.
By bodily strength.
Vaya.
Vaya.
By youth.
By youth.
Moda.
Moda.
By abundant sense enjoyment.
By abundant sense enjoyment.
Pramudita.
Pramudita.
Being excited.
Being excited.
Mahasorata.
Mahasorata.
A great deal of sexual.
A great deal of sexual.
Mituna.
Mituna.
Combinations of man and woman.
Combinations of man and woman.
Vyavaya Apavaga.
Vyavaya Apavaga.
At the end of their period of sexual enjoyment.
At the end of the period of sexual enjoyment.
Varsha.
Varsha.
In the last year.
In the last year.
Trita Eka Garba.
Trita Eka Garba.
Who conceive one child.
Who conceive one child.
Kalatranam.
Kalatranam.
Of those who have wives.
Of those who have wives.
Tatra. There. Two. But. Treta Yuga Sama.
Treta Yuga Sama.
Exactly like the Treta Yuga.
Exactly like the Treta Yuga.
When there is no tribulation.
When there is no tribulation.
Kala.
Kala.
Time. Vartate.
Vartate.
Exists. Translation. In these 8 varshas or tracts of land, human beings live 10,000 years, according to earthly calculations. All the inhabitants are almost like demigods. They have the bodily strength of 10,000 elephants. Indeed, their bodies are as sturdy as thunderbolts. The youthful duration of their lives is very pleasing, and both men and women enjoy sexual union with great pleasure for a long time. After years of sensual pleasure, when a balance of 1 year of life remains, the wife conceives a child. Thus, the standard of pleasure for the residents of these heavenly regions is exactly like that of human beings who lived during Treta Yuga. Srila Prabhupada's purport. Srila Prabhupada ki.
Yeah.
There are 4 yugas: Satya Yuga, Treta Yuga, Dwapara Yuga, and Kali Yuga. During the first yuga, Satya Yuga, people were very pious. Everyone practiced the mystic yoga system for spiritual understanding and realization of God. Because everyone was always absorbed in samadhi, no one was interested in material sense enjoyment. During Treta Yuga, people enjoyed sense pleasure without tribulations. Material miseries began in Dwapara Yuga, but they were not very stringent. Stringent material miseries really began from the advent of Kali Yuga. Another point in this verse is that in all 8 of these heavenly varshas, although men and women enjoy sex pleasure, there is no pregnancy. Pregnancy takes place only in lower grade life. For example, animals like dogs and hogs become pregnant twice a year, and each time they beget at least half a dozen offspring. Even lower species of life, such as snakes, give birth to hundreds of young at one time. This verse informs us that in grades of life higher than ours, pregnancy occurs once in a lifetime. People still have sex life, but there is no pregnancy. In the spiritual world, people are not very attracted to sex life due to their exalted devotional attitude. Practically speaking, there is no sex life in the spiritual world. But even if sometimes it does occur, there is no pregnancy at all. On the planet Earth, however, human beings do become pregnant, although the tendency is to avoid having children. In this sinful age of Kali, people have even taken to the process of killing the child in the womb. This is the most degraded practice. It can only perpetuate the miserable conditions of those who perform it. Amagana Tamarandasya Gananjana Shalakaya Chakshuran Militam Jena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha Sri Chaitanya Manovishtam Stapitam Yena Bhutale Swayam Rupadamayam Tadati Swapadantikam Vandeham Shri Guru Shri Uttapadakamalam Shri Gurun Vaishnavam Shri Rupam Sagrajatam Sahagana Raganatam Vitam Tam Sajivam Sarvaitam Savadutam Harijana Sahitam Krishna Chaitanya Devam Shri Radha Krishna Padam Sahagana Lalita Shri Vishakan Vitam Shah He Krishna Karuna Sindhu Dinabando Jagatpate Gopisha Gopika Kanta Radha Kanta Namostute Tapta Kanchana Gorangi Radhe Vrindavaneshwari Vrishabhanu Sutta Devi Pranamami Hari Priye Vanshakalpa Tarubhyascha Kripasindubhyevacha Patitanam Bhavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Shri Vasari Gaura Bhakta Vrinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare. So in the purport to this verse, Srila Prabhupada describes the cycle of 4 yugas. One thing that I've had difficulty with in reading the Srimad Bhagavatam over many years and studying the different pastimes is that many of the pastimes in the Srimad Bhagavatam take place in Satya Yuga and in Treta Yuga. And yet, at the same time, we often read about battles between the demons and the demigods. We read about demons disturbing sacrifices. We read about kings who become corrupted by sense enjoyment and act just for the benefit of their own families rather than the benefit of the citizens at large. And we read about different incarnations of Lord Vishnu having to come to re-establish law and order. But it's important to remember that the Srimad Bhagavatam is a selective history of the universe. And in Shukadev Goswami, he selects events from the entire kind of corpus of historical records of the universe and gathers together them in a way that will focus on Krishna's interactions with his devotees. So, there's an expression, is there no news is good news. So all the good news of Treta Yuga and Satya Yuga and Dwapara Yuga, there was no need to talk about it. It was that was it. People were pious in Satya Yuga, and in Treta Yuga, people enjoyed material sense enjoyment without the regulations of karma kanda activities, without harming other living entities. And in Dwapara Yuga, generally there was kind of peaceful interaction between the different sections of society. So there was no real news there. There was nothing very much there. Small events, no doubt, were recorded, but they haven't been passed down, because the more important events were when there was actually some disturbance. So just as Krishna says, whenever and wherever there's a predominant rise of irreligion, at that time I descend. So the Srimad Bhagavatam describes those very, very rare occasions in Satya Yuga and Treta Yuga and Dwapara Yuga when due to some reason, we don't always know the reason, sometimes it's Krishna's creating some Leela so that he can actually present a higher principle. So just here, for example, here we're reading about this is actually called the lower heavenly planets. And Srila Prabhupada describes this in the next verse. So in the next verse, he explains that these 8 varshas, which surround Ilavata Varsh or Bharat Varsh, then these are the lower heavenly planets, and that they're all devotees of the Lord, but they're very much attached to material sense enjoyment. So it would seem that none of the actual administrative demigods, reside permanently in this realm. We see the administrative demigods like Indra and Varuna and Agni, Vayu. Then sometimes they have to engage in warfare with the Asuras and the Daityas and the Danavas, and sometimes they, Indra, for example, he on many occasions throughout the Srimad Bhagavatam, it's described how Indra, just by making some slight mistake or perhaps inadvertently offending a Vaishnava, and he has to suffer some sinful reaction. So it would seem strange in one sense that the highest person in that realm of the demigods, he is the one who seems to suffer the most, whereas those demigods in the lower regions, they're just enjoying the whole time. They've got their nice gardens and their beautiful mountains and their streams and unlimited sex life without any children, without breaking any regulative principles. However, because Indra and the administrative demigods, they take on the responsibility of maintaining all of these worlds under the direction of Lord Brahma, the great-grandfather, and they're also devotees of the Supreme Lord, so they also understand the purpose of all of these different realms. So they're taking on that responsibility. So although they're the highest and they've got the most potential power and the most potential opulence, still they're, due to taking on that responsibility, then they have to sometimes suffer like some sinful reaction. So this is a good thing to remember when we're looking at society even in Kali Yuga, which is in one sense is a similar situation, that in Kali Yuga, although everything's very mixed up in terms of the varnas and the ashrams, and there's very few people who actually have knowledge of like a higher system of order, but still there are people who are pious who try to take on responsibility for alleviating the miseries of the general people. And often those people end up in situations of conflict. Srila Prabhupada explains this in one lecture. He says that in the material world, everyone is just engaged in varieties of sense gratification. And he explains that President Roosevelt, he had his idea of how the people of his nation should enjoy sense gratification. And Adolf Hitler had another idea about how the people of Europe should enjoy sense gratification. And Mr. Stalin had another idea about how the people of Russia should enjoy sense gratification. In the beginning of their political careers, they all had this, you would have found that in the beginning of their political careers, they had some idea of some system which would alleviate conflict and inequality between people and allow people to thrive in their natural occupations. They all had that idea, and they all saw that certain regressive elements in society had to be removed to do that. And then gradually that conflict brought about the world war. So similarly, so you may think, well, why can't we all just live like they do on the lower why can't we just live like they do on the lower heavenly planets that are being described here? Why can't we just learn to live with nature and just learn to live together peacefully and not to try to become powerful, not to try to control people? Why can't we just let them enjoy? So this is very much like a kind of utopian socialist idea. The reason that it doesn't work is because all living beings in the material world have in their hearts what is sometimes described as vasanas. That means very deeply rooted desires for controllership, for envy of other living beings, for enjoyment at the sake of any cost. By them taking birth in different yugas, on different planets, in different realms of the universe, they're just fulfilling certain desires according to their karma and according to some desires that they have. So it's an amazing arrangement of. It's actually Krishna as the super soul makes this all possible. He makes it possible for everyone to gradually receive the fruits of their activities, to receive their karmic reactions in such a way that all the billions and trillions of living entities in the universe, in all the universes, who are receiving their karmic reactions, they can do so without interfering with the karmic reactions of other living entities. So sometimes, a lot of living entities come together on the lower heavenly planets because they've got some good karma that allows them to enjoy on the lower heavenly planets for some time. But as we read, it's not eternal. They live for, tens of thousands of years, perhaps more than millions of years. And then at the end of, and they don't, and there's no there's no perception of material suffering there. And they even don't have to take on the very difficult responsibility of bringing up children, because they gave birth right at the end of their life. And as far as I can remember, the children are they grow up to adulthood almost immediately. So it's not that when these lower demigods are 99 years old, or 99,000 years old, all of a sudden they have to change the nappies of their children when they're on the deathbed. No, it's like this. They have a child at the end of their life, and that child grows up to adulthood very, very quickly. It's not that when they die, there's a load of abandoned toddlers around, in their nappies, in the lower heavenly planets. No, it's all arranged for uninterrupted material sense gratification. But then, as it's described in the Bhagavad Gita, when they come to the end of years of vast sense enjoyment, Shine Punya Marcha Lokam Vishanti, they again descend to the planet Earth, to Bharatvarsha, which is like the field of activities, where again they're living in a very painstaking situation, where they have to continuously be aware that their activities are going to incur karma, and that they have to live according to very strict rules and regulations. And if according to their karma, they may take birth in Kali Yuga. And then because of the nature of Kali Yuga, Prayana Kalyasa Pavya Kala Visminyagajana Mandasumandamatiyo Mandabhagyo Padracha. In this age of Kali, men have but short lives. They are lazy, misguided, unlucky, and above all, always disturbed. So, as we know from personal experience, when we're living in a very comfortable situation where we can fulfill most of our material desires, then generally we're not plagued by the negative side of our personality. That's why people who own nightclubs and people who run big music festivals, or people who own big hotels, they create an extremely heavenly environment, so that all of their customers can come and enjoy in a very heavenly environment, where they won't have to deal with the sort of emotional issues in their life. Many of those very rich people who go to those places, they're criminals. So they're actually people who are very violent, very envious, very, very sinful. But the owners of those festivals or places or holiday resorts, they know how to create that sort of luxurious atmosphere. But when those people come into an environment which is much more stressful, then all of those deep vasanas, very deeply rooted anarthas, and they come out and cause so much conflict and distress and violence and all of the negative qualities. So that's what happens. Because actually the whole material universe is a prison. That's why Durga Devi, Durga means, Srila Prabhupada says, Durga is a big fort, a fortress. It's a place that is designed to be impenetrable, or designed to be a place that you can't escape from. and because you can only escape from it when you are no longer restricted by the walls of the fortress. So the walls of the fortress consist of material energy. So as long as you have some material energy residing in your being, like, so, I mean, we're covered by material energy. We're covered by the physical body, which is made of material elements, and we're covered by the subtle body. and so as long as we have those coverings, then we can't get out of the walls of this universe. So the whole process of purification and rectification, just as in a prison there's a process of purification, a process of rectification is there. Many prisons are designed with that purpose in mind. So similarly, on this universe, that process is also there. And sometimes, sometimes the living entities are in an environment where they forget about that. But as we hear, Srila Prabhupada says that because in this Kali Yuga is that Kali Yuga in the day of Brahma, when Krishna appears, and now Lord Chaitanya has also appeared. So demigods who are actually aware of that this is that time, that special time. This is only one Kali Yuga out of 1,000 Kali Yugas, only 1 in 1,000 Mahakalpas, or Kalpas rather. Then, because the demigods know that this is a special time, then Srila Prabhupada says that they're desiring to take birth in Kali Yuga, and they actually worship Kali Yuga, because in this age, then by Harinam Sankirtan, you can quickly accrue the same amount of purification as would previously take many, many lifetimes to attain. And actually in this Kali Yuga, especially because Lord Chaitanya has come to give Krishna Prema, and it's not that Lord Chaitanya does that in every time he appears, but in this Kali Yuga, then we have an opportunity to attain that status of life which Srila Prabhupada describes here in the spiritual world. That in the spiritual world, people still have sex life, but in the spiritual world, people are not very attracted to sex life due to their exalted devotional attitude. Practically speaking, there is no sex life in the spiritual world. But even if sometimes it does occur, there is no pregnancy at all. So it's interesting because Srila Prabhupada says that sex life is the highest pleasure in the material world. And he also says in the beginning of the first canto that sex life only exists in the material universe because the original sex life is there in the spiritual world. But elsewhere, Srila Prabhupada says that the residents of Vaikuntha and of all of the realms in the spiritual world, they're generally engaged in Sankirtan, in singing and dancing and remembering and enacting Lord Krishna's pastimes. And that activity is the most blissful activity. And for that reason, they're not engaged in sex life. I don't know anything about sex life in the spiritual world, and I've got no real interest to know what it's about. It's generally considered a topic that's only discussed amongst devotees who've at least attained the spontaneous platform of devotional service. And even amongst those, they won't speak about it openly. And for myself, I'm not interested in it, but I am interested in understanding how to attain that level of enjoyment where we're no longer interested in the highest material pleasure, whatever that is for us. Or we're not interested in the greatest comfort. Like, for example, we sometimes go on holiday or take a break because we want to be in an environment where we're not bothered by any thoughts that can cause us stress, or any thoughts that can cause us to break our meditation on Krishna. So we want to go in that environment because we've understood that at present my devotional service is not strong enough to enable me to continue uninterruptedly without the need for some recreation. Whereas a pure devotee, as we see in the life of Srila Prabhupada, and Srila Prabhupada himself quotes devotees like Prahlad Maharaj and many associates of Lord Chaitanya, who were so much attached to Sankirtan and were spontaneously engaged in Sankirtan that nothing disturbed them. So Sankirtan doesn't just mean dancing in front of the deities, but Sankirtan, Srila Prabhupada says, Sankirtan is complete kirtan. So it includes reading Krishna's pastimes, discussing Krishna's pastimes, writing songs to help us remember Krishna's pastimes, or writing songs to share, to create nice festivals for the pleasure of Krishna. And we can, especially in Chaitanya Charitamrita, we read there are many examples of how Lord Chaitanya's associates would derive great satisfaction and bliss by coming together and celebrating festivals in a very varied way. Like, I read recently that that during the festival of Vijay Dashami in Jaguri, Lord Chaitanya was playing the part of Hanumanji, because Vijay Dashami is the day on which Ram kills Ravan. So Lord Chaitanya, he took on the mood of Hanuman, and he jumped up onto some building and started demolishing the wall, because he was impersonating Hanuman rescuing Sita Devi from Ravan's palace. There are other pastimes where Lord Nityananda reenacts the pastimes of Krishna and Balaram, and also Lakshman and Hanuman is a famous pastime there also. And then there's another pastime where Lord Chaitanya takes on the part of Lakshmi Devi, and there's many wonderful descriptions of these festivals. And actually, so and devotees who like Lord Indra and the administrative demigods, in one sense, they're like our temple presidents, but they've got a bigger temple. They've got like a whole planetary system to look after. But they're invited to all of the big festivals as well, and they're always thinking about how can we maintain a certain law and order so that Krishna's desire that living entities make the best use of the human life can actually be fulfilled. This is like the mood of all of the pious kings that we read about in the Bhagavatam, like Maharaj Yudhishthira, Maharaj Dhruva, Maharaj Priyavrata. That's their mood. Maharaj Bharat, they're wanting to create an environment in their kingdom that will enable everyone to get touched by Krishna's mercy, in whatever form that takes place in the particular yuga that they're living in. But that requires that means they're taking on quite a lot of headaches to be able to do that. But taking on a headache is that's actually part of the bliss of spiritual life. That's a kind of rasa in itself. In one sense, it's vatsalya ras. It's like the ras of taking on anxiety so that your dependents can actually enjoy life, really enjoy life, enjoy spiritual life, so that your dependents can get a taste for spiritual life that will enable them to abandon their taste for material life. Just like we read this pastime of Damodar Leela, where that's why Mother Yashoda got the stick out to threaten Krishna. It's not she was necessarily going to hit him with a stick, but she wanted Krishna to be afraid of her because he acted so in such a naughty way that she was afraid that he was going to give up his relationship with her and just run off with the boys and no longer be disciplined. She was afraid that she wasn't going to be able to discipline him and that he was going to get into bad association. So that's like a constant juggling act that a manager like Indra has, or the kings have, how to administer it, how to administer law and order, but without alienating the citizens, without alienating the dependents. There has to be some love there also. And sometimes the citizens are not in a condition to be able to appreciate the nature of that love when it comes in the form of rules and regulations. So Sankirtan is a wonderful activity which can enable us all as a community to come together and experience the ecstasy of the process of devotional service. And especially when it's a big festival, like Rath Yatra in London, like Janmashtami at the Manor, like Govardhan Puja here or Holi here, then we also appreciate that it takes quite a lot of work to stage such a festival. And in the process of staging those festivals, there's going to be some conflict. There's going to be some uprising of our anatas. We're not in the lower heavenly planets where we're just enjoying, unrestricted sense gratification. No, we're not in that situation. But, we can consider ourselves fortunate that we are in that difficult situation because it gives us an opportunity to actually experience this higher rasa, this kind of mood of vatsalya, of protecting those who are less knowledgeable than ourselves or less aware of Krishna's mercy than ourselves. But it's a difficult task. And in one sense, the whole world is now having to face up to that task, because the whole world is having to take on the responsibility of being leaders for the future generation. And as far as I know, in one sense, it's only in wartime that kind of responsibility is placed on the citizens. And in one sense, it was never really placed on the Shudras because they weren't supposed to fight anyway. But now everybody's been asked to become like a Kshatriya and control your senses, cut down your consumption, think about every single thing you do, how it's going to have how that's going to have a knock-on effect for the next generation. So therefore, Srila Prabhupada's books, especially the Bhagavad Gita and the Nectar of Instruction, the Sri Upanishad, there's so much resources there for people to actually be able to assimilate this kind of dual role of being a responsible leader or parent or a responsible activist in some way, and simultaneously be able to maintain that mood of love. So Sankirtan, Srila Prabhupada saw Sankirtan as the only means, really. How is it described? Chittadavanamajanam Navama Hadavaganyama. And when it's described as like the lubrication that allows, it's like the oil in the engine that allows parts to like move together without too much friction. So I'll stop there, and are there any questions or comments? Anything, John? Okay. Srimad Bhagavatam ki. Srila Prabhupada ki. Nitai Gaura Premanandi.
Yeah.